Before we continue, I really want to explain the reason why I'm going over a lot of different tools that uh, may seem like they do the same thing. Now, the reason for going over different EQs and different compressors is back um, before the 80s, before the consoles from the 80s, you got um, a bunch of people going to different studios because different studios had their own sound. Abbey Road had their own sound, and Ocean Way had their own sound because they used different types of gear that were basically one of a kind or, yeah, built specifically for that studio, um, and different kinds of, um, compressors and EQs. And once in the 80s, once compressors kind of had their own little, well, when compressors had a resurgence, they all the studios basically had the same console. Compressors were mass produced, sounding the same, using the exact same circuitry. Um, there were revisions, but the original stuff um, had its own sound, and that's why you could say that a lot of stuff on the radio all sounds the same. Now, where does this kind of fall into dance music? There's this there's this thing where uh, everyone has to use Logic. Logic has the same EQ, the same kind of linearity, um, uh, and people use the same kind of settings on uh, the L2 or well, I use the same setting on the L2, but that's a maximizer. But it's using different kind of compressors, kind of looking into the past to use the stuff that made those songs from the 60s unique. And I'm not comparing myself to any of the rock people from the 60s and 70s, but it's what you should be striving for. That you should not just use one EQ. You should use one EQ for the sake of learning, but then you should use different kinds to kind of get you your own sound. Um, if we all used, the same presets on Silent One, it'd sound kind of boring. But there's a difference between a saw wave on a Virus and a saw wave on a Moog synth, or a saw wave in uh, Massive. Some are Alias, some are not. Um, the the Moog has a certain kind of saturation that goes with it, and it's you could you can easily tell the difference between them, and you should really strive to be using different things in your processing, much like you're trying to use. Well, I hope you're trying to use different instruments, different sample sources. Um, you should be using different kinds of compressors. I showed you how a compressor adds color. You can use two kinds of compressors. You can use the LA2A kind of emulation, and then put the Ableton compressor on it to redigitize it and kind of regain control of it. It's not about yeah. Another thing is not about um, kind of following what other people are using. It's kind of taking you know taking parts of what other people do and using your own thing. Um, you know, using isotope ozone just by itself, yeah, that's kind of okay. But then putting the SSL, which is an 80s style compressor before that, and having it on other drum tracks, and then kind of using compression, using uh, PSP Vintage Warmer before the L2 or the L3, or putting an EQ after PSP Vintage Warmer, in between the PSP and the L2, and kind of adding some high end, um, throwing a reverb, slight reverb, or a stereo widener really adds to getting your own special kind of sound, really. If you just want to be like everyone else, yeah, I guess you can use Logic and the ES2 and kind of rub each other's dicks doing that. But, I have a different kind of philosophy. I have, right next to me, I have an EQ that's a cheapo kind of stereo EQ from the late 80s. And, I have it, and kind of started a collection of older kind of convolution type EQs just to get that kind of special sound. I have a VHS tape player um, because it has a nice little um, frequency response that I find satisfying, if I can say that. Um, but yeah, I wanted to kind of show you more of what an EQ and a compressor does. I want to show you more so like what it adds and what it can also take away, because we're going to be talking about what it's taking away, but you can get to like what it adds. It can add something, and um, probably can't hear the difference now, but you'll really appreciate what it adds later. And I guess that's my rant. I don't know. Yeah, that's it.